Friends, would you give it up for our speaker today, our beloved Dr. Scott Myers.
Good morning. Can everyone hear? Good. First of all, it's an honor to be asked to speak this morning. Kathy and I love First Christian. We consider First Christian Church our family. The famous line from the Ted Lasso Christmas special was, there's family you're born with, and then there's the family you make along the way. We're clearly all among family here in this room today. If something happens, I've got readers, I have hearing aids, they've got me hooked up, so if something falls off, just let me know, okay? The question that always comes up is, how do you go from being, how does a veterinarian, how in the world do they become a sculptor for the Pro Football Hall of Fame? And how do you go from the pet hospital of Granbury to doing football players? And for me, it starts in the 8th grade. I went to North Oaks Junior High. I grew up in Haltom City, which is interesting. There's 4 or 5 of us in here that grew up within a block of each other. And Haltom City is a nice place to grow up. None of us ever missed a meal. We had shelter over our head, clothes to wear, but I can assure you at our house, I don't know about the Bedford household, but if you want to go to college, you had to figure it out, okay? There was no college financial plan. And along the way, I was very fortunate, but I picked up a few scholarships here and there. And that's why today is so important, because those little scholarships got me from one step to the next. You have no idea how much that helps the young person. We see these kids run around at 2, 3, 6 years of age. We have no idea what their future holds. They don't know what their potential is, but if we put them in a position to get an education and to be able to help them financially, I couldn't have gone to school without help. It will make a world of difference in their lives. In my case, I had a teacher named Darnell Swim at North Oaks Junior High who saw me as a young man who had some artistic ability and some desire. And so what she did is she, an educator, took her and her husband, S.A. Swim. They picked me up on Saturdays and they took me to museums and galleries. And again, I don't know about you guys in Haltom City, but I'd never seen original oil paintings and sculpture. And so she introduced me to all of that. And she would then have this project for us. Every week we had to do a drawing, and it was due on Friday morning, so that meant on Thursday night you went and did a drawing of a bucking horse or a power drill. One time I even drew a picture of a roll of toilet paper, which is kind of, it actually makes a really cool picture. But anyway, then she said, could I take these down to the teacher's lounge and show them, and I was like, sure. Well, anyway, she would come back with $10. She sold them. And it might as well have been $500 to me. I was so happy. So I was so excited about that. And then she showed me American Artist magazine. And this was 1973, 74, so they went back to the early 50s. And there was a stack. I read all of them twice. And then Southwest Art magazine, and then the International Art Collector. And I was just foaming at the mouth. I mean, I was so excited. And she goes, great, isn't it? And I was like, oh, absolutely. And she goes, now I gotta give you some advice. I said, yes, ma'am. And she goes, do not be an artist. I was like, okay. And she goes, look, now this is before the internet and before cell phones. There was a thing called a commercial artist. And it had a slightly negative connotation because commercial artists did lettering and they did layouts, and they didn't want me to become a commercial artist. She said, I want you to be able to do the kind of art you want to make. Well, I was involved with rodeo. I roped calves, and we didn't have a lot, but I had enough to get a couple horses, borrowed a saddle, traded for spurs, the whole thing, and got to do some rodeo. And in doing so, I'd take my horse to the vet, get him dewormed, float his teeth, and I looked at those guys and I thought, man, I'm pretty punchy dudes. I like those guys, so I think I might want to be one of them. Some of you guys remember the books by James Herriot, All Things Wise and Wonderful, All Things Bright and Beautiful. There was another guy named Ben K. Green that wrote books called Wild Cow Tales and Horse Trading. Those books influenced me, so I thought, I'll go be a veterinarian. And it was a good choice. This month, that makes 42 years for me, and I still practice full-time at this place here. So we're going along and things are good. And what the interesting thing is, I went to Texas A&M and I was there for 7 years, 3 years in undergraduate, 4 in veterinary school, and I paid for 99% of it with art. So she told me not to be an artist, to go get an education, but art paid for the education. Some of you guys remember the late 70s, early 80s, oil and gas was booming in Texas. And so what I would do is and then those guys would buy horses and cattle and Western art. Well, I was doing Western art. So those guys would buy, stuff from me. Now, I couldn't afford oil paint, and I couldn't afford to cast bronze, but I had colored pencils and pastels, and I would do a big drawing. Well, that would sell for $3,000, and then I took that and put every penny of that into printing a limited edition. So I got 400 prints, and I sold them for $25 a piece. And, I'm an Aggie, but I can figure out that's more money than $3,000. So I had a built-in network. I had the College of Agriculture, I had the Animal Science Department, I had the Veterinary College, and so all those connections is where I sold all those prints. And to this day, I still go into vet clinics out in West Texas and stuff, and there'll be a print or two, which is kind of a cool thing. But anyway, I'm doing this, and the whole point of this is I'm having these 2 parallel lives that I started living in college, and it's just happened forever all the way. It never stopped. It's always been doing both. In 1990, I hit a patch, a rough spot, and I just thought, I need one of those things in your life, y'all have had them, where you just want to reevaluate where you are. I didn't want to quit my job. I liked my job, but I thought, what do you really want to do? What I really wanted to do was become a sculptor. So I found a guy in Dallas, and he taught from live models, so we'd have a person and we'd be doing a portrait. And I studied with him for a couple of years, and after a couple of years I realized, I learned more, broadened my horizons, and I realized if you want to be the very, very best, you need to find the best. And there was a man named Edward Fraughton. He was the best in the U.S. At the time. Now, sadly, Ed passed away in the last couple of years. But when Ed was, just when I was coming into my area and I wanted to take lessons from him, he quit teaching. I was like, ugh. But Ed Fraughton had a student named Blair Buswell, and Blair Buswell became my teacher. When I started with Blair Buswell, he had been working with the Pro Football Hall of Fame for 7 or 8 years. So I studied with Buswell for 12 years, and during that 20-year period, he became a supervisor. And they wanted to improve the quality of the bus. They wanted more continuity, and Buswell started giving artists an opportunity. So in 2003, I did Elvin Bethea for the Houston Oilers. And it was really funny. I remember I was in his kitchen on Memorial Day, right up on his face, sculpting away, and he goes, "How many of these have you done?" I was like, "You're my first." So you're like, oh, okay, cool. Then I waited. Other artists had an opportunity, and I waited, and in 2006, I got to do Rayfield Wright. And then since then, I've done 28 busts over the last 23 years. So that's the journey. This is, thank you. Kathy and I got to talking last night, and we didn't realize, we just built a new studio for me, and I'm so grateful to have a wife who supports my vision and is there for what I'm trying to do with my life. We counted it up. This is the 12th studio that I've worked in. This is my new studio, and we've been in it about a year. It has a 20-foot ceiling, so I can easily do a life-size horse and rider. I can do a 1.5 times life-size man, which would put it 12 or 13 feet. Lots of room, lots of light. And then sometimes I have lots of visitors that I just met, and then other times I have a few visitors that I've known a long time. Now, you're not going to get very far without old John. And you could tell he was wanting to, get his portrait done. Oh, look, there's others. So it's always great to have folks come to the studio. There's Rita, and I wish they were here today. And then I guess John's trying to get his bust done, so we checked him for his measurements. I thought it'd be nice to quickly go through the process. When a player gets into the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the great Drew Pearson that played for the Cowboys, they get to pick how they look, okay? So this is Drew Pearson in 2021 when I met him, and there's me measuring Drew. And then this is how Drew wanted to look. At the time, he said he was most interested in his hairdo. And he said, I had the largest afro in the NFL and I want to have it now. Well, great, but that does present a few problems. So that is all the same human being. You study that for a minute. There's a big, big difference in, I'm going to try to use my pointer, but that guy there and that guy. Yeah. But I listened to him. Now, there's a couple of restrictions. First of all, there's a space for those, and, that's a lot of hair. So I had to be careful there. Plus, I told him, I said, I don't want this to be a portrait of your hair with you secondary. I want you to be the portrait and your hair comes along. So you would think that those measurements would be easy, but they're not. And if you look close, there's two different colors. The color that's blackish or pencil color, that's the measurements I got from the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And then when I remeasured him, well, those are my measurements. So sometimes the measurements you get aren't exact. And the reason those are important is this is how it starts. You go to Home Depot, you get a pipe, and you put some clay on it. And then you start just getting in the ballpark with your measurements, and you turn it into that. And if you look really close, there's a nail right there. I put a nail in his ear and a nail in his chin. And then that's our points of reference. Now you can see the nail better. And he's starting to develop. You see the musculature and the bones. And then you try to make it to where it's more realistic. Now, for me, I have to get a likeness of the person as they are today. But remember, that they don't let them go in as they are today. They go in as they would play. So they pick the age. So then we have to go back in time. So this is what it looked like when we started. And there's a side-by-side on the aging process. Now, that's just a little bit of it. There's a whole lot more to come. By the way, even Caucasian men have fuller lips when they're younger. The distance between your bottom of your nose and your upper lip gets longer as you get older, so we tend to cheat and shorten it. There's a lot of little things you can do to make someone look younger. Now, that's a lot of hair, and it's way too much, but I figured I would start by putting it on and taking it off. And then he came for his visit, and we started working on it, and you can see I toned it down, and then once I got the shape right, I started adding there. We found a spot that he liked, and I thought it was really cool. The second when he unveiled it, there's the finished clay. But when he unveiled it with Roger Staubach, he had to poof the hair. Now, most players, I get them their bust. I either ship it to them if they're out of state, or the Cowboys like Gil Brandt or Cliff Harris, they'll meet you in Fort Worth to pick theirs up. So it was a Saturday, and it was like 1 week, actually 6 days after the Hall of Fame induction. I had his bust ready to pick up, and I sent him a text, and thinking like I'll see you in a week or two or whatever. And y'all ever had that feeling when you send the text and it just hardly sends, and there's an answer back? It was him, and he was like, "How about tomorrow?" I was like, "Cool." So I called Kathy. Do we have anything? No. So we met him in Fort Worth at the Fort Worth Museum of Modern Art. And he's just the greatest guy. And he brought 2 game jerseys for us, one for her, one for me, signed. It is a wonderful, wonderful guy. There we go. So I just finished Friday, turned it in, my 28th piece, which is the great Adam Vinatieri. And by the way, the 387, they number them. So if you divide 28 into 387, it's a little over 7% that I've done, which is, it's just a kind of a cool thing to be involved with these guys. Adam played 10 years with the New England Patriots, and with Tom, so he got the famous blizzard kick. I don't know if you guys remember that. It was 2002. He kicked 2 of them in the blizzard, and that's kind of what made Adam Vinatieri. Anyway, with Tom Brady, he won 3 Super Bowls. And that's Adam there, of course. And then he went on to another team for 14 more years and played with Peyton Manning. So he's had quite a career. He played 24 years. He scored 2,673 points. And what's crazy about it is he did it 1 and 3 points at a time. So that's a lot of kicks. Yeah. There's Adam on May the 2nd. He came to Granbury. Behind him is all these pictures of his different eras. And what they do is they pick. And so he's 53, and he wanted to go back about 15 to 18 years. So we found a very specific area in there, and he picked it. And what was really great is his wife came, and she was so nice, but she was so helpful because he was always cutting up and joking and telling stories. And I would ask her, does this remind you of when he was, oh yeah, we had just moved to Indianapolis. And she was very helpful in getting the likeness. Kathy went to church, and she came back from church. She we were wrapping up. And to give you an idea of how, oh, by the way, the Hall of Fame doesn't allow me to show the face until after August the 8th. So August the 8th, I can show you. I have another picture without that. But they are so kind. They spent 6.5 hours with us on Saturday. Then we went to dinner with them. And then Sunday morning, they both even talked about delaying their flight to give us more time. And I was like, God, no, we're good. But I mean, I was very surprised about that. He's just a wonderful individual. Okay, so here's the thing. How do I go from working on Maine Coon cats to making life-size sculptures? You know, how do you go from working with Theo, and we made matching ties, to Cliff Harris? And, you know, do I pick Chiquita or Andre Johnson? And this is the struggle. You know, I'm a big believer in God's will, okay? And that my favorite athlete of all time is Steve Prefontaine. He was a long-distance runner at the University of Oregon. He died early, but he was a great runner. And he said to give anything less than your best is to sacrifice the gift. Well, every single person in this room has been gifted with something. And you need to think about that because God gave you these gifts. Well, for years, people made the assumption that when are you going to leave here and do this full time? Well, so did I. You know, I didn't know. I just kept thinking, what do you want me to do, God? You know, and I always joke and say I'm going to be the most famous veterinary sculptor in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I'm the only one. But, I mean, I've struggled and wrestled with it. At one point, Kathy and I sold the practice, so I worked for the new owner, and I was painting or sculpting 5 days a week and practicing 2. So I never quit, but I was really, you know, leaning that art thing. And it was frustrating because you just keep fighting and fighting and fighting. You know, like for instance, I'd win an award and then be a finalist for a competition, win the competition only to have a funding issue, and it would fall apart. Texas A&M had a 22-foot monument for the College of Veterinary Medicine, of all things. I became a finalist. I won it, only to have it killed in funding. And, you know, I was already getting a warehouse. I had scaffolding. I had assistant, you know. So what do you do? And I just keep thinking, God, you know, what do you want me to do here? And God was like, you just keep your head down. You know, you're in the wilderness. Keep working. Keep at it. Try to get better. Keep getting better. Well, that went on for years and years. When I'm at the clinic, I see 30, 35 cases a day running up and down the hall. The girls and I always talk about they're running around with their hair on fire, you know? Well, when you're in the studio, it is the polar opposite. It's quiet. And you work. And it's actually, I'm just telling you, this happened whether you believe it or not. I'm painting, and as I'm painting, I felt something on my left shoulder. Well, there's nobody there but me. And God spoke to me, and God said, that's not what I had planned for you. There wasn't any lightning bolts. He didn't say it twice. He just like, that's not what I had planned for you. So I went to Dr. McCall and Dr. Wallace, and I went with them and bought back the practice I sold because I needed them and they needed me. And we, you know, I'm like, what do you want me to do, God? Well, that's what I did. And then I never quit being an artist. I still kept getting Hall of Fame bust, but I got back into ownership and I just kept after it and kept after it. And, you know, there's this whole idea of service, this whole idea of serving other people. And the practice of veterinary medicine, yes, you work on animals, but what you're really working on is you're helping people. And I've had multiple times this has happened. Let's say a woman loses her husband, and they had a wonderful marriage, and the husband's dog was his dog. That dog lives another 7 or 8 years. When that dog goes, that's the last breathing thing of her husband that she had. That has taught me a lot about service. That has taught me a lot about caring for other people. And that also then started to transition into my sculpture about caring for people and learning. See, when you get you do a sculpture, you got to do 3 things. You got to get an absolute likeness, okay? Absolute. It's got to look like them. Number 2, it's got to have a great expression. They can be happy, they can be sad, they can be emotionally, tense, whatever. You can put that in there. But then you have to find that something special in someone that makes them them. And so I noticed that as God would have me keep working and working, the love and the care and the ministry that was going on in the practice started getting into the sculpture. And that's why I'm so attracted to portrait sculpture, is because it's the landscape of the human face. So, you just think, I don't know what it is, but I'm just going to keep walking. Now, I want to take a sidebar here. I believe in God's will. And I also believe it doesn't necessarily hit people in college. It can hit people when they're 80 years old. Or it's a constant thing. But you can't do God's work if you don't do the prep work. Okay? And, my wife's going to say, you don't get to preaching, but I'm just telling you, you can't sit around waiting for God to give you a call if you're not prepared. And you say, well, I don't know what I'm prepared to do. Me too. But I know if you're doing something and you're serving and you're helping, when your time, that will pay off into whatever He wants you to do. I believe that completely. To put it, even though this happened later, put this in words for me. When Kathy was on the committee with Dr. Coleman, and they were in the group trying to decide about, La Reunion, this quote was so powerful to me that I cut it out, and that's actually taped on top of my computer. And so this quote is from Mac McCarter, but it was provided to me, or to Kathy, to me, by Dr. Coleman. And it says, "We are fulfilled only as we serve others. We are complete only as we give ourselves to others. And we are perfected only as we seek to love others. This is our task, to become other-centered rather than self-centered." I don't know any other way to live but that, okay? And that, even though that came later, that's what it felt like walking in the wilderness for so long. Well, all of a sudden came along Bryant Young. Now, Bryant Young, well, first of all, I started following pro football when I was old enough to read. So when I was reading, I would read stats and scores, and I learned all my numbers by that Chuck Howley was 54 and Leroy Jordan was 55 and Bob Lilly was 74. I mean, that's how I did all that. You older folks remember the Cowboys of that era. Yeah, by the way, Walt Garrison was 32 and, so anyway. But I have a really pretty good idea of the history. And so when you get a Hall of Famer, you generally know, well, I'm not going to kid you. They called and said, "You're going to do Bryant Young." And I was like, yeah, okay. I think, and I didn't know who Bryant Young was. Well, I quickly found out that is one killer skull. That is a good looking head. And then I remembered, I was like, oh yeah, he played with Charles Haley and Dana Stubblefield and that 49er era. I remember that guy. Yeah, it was cool. And so here's this random player coming into this random sculptor's life. So I meet with Brian, and if any of you ever wonder why I didn't play pro football, that is not a doctored photograph. That is a big man. I'm standing and he's sitting. He is a good guy. Well, so when you're sculpting someone, I'll go back to this one, and you're studying and looking and all that, they're talking to you, and I'm listening, but I'm working too. But there we could talk about a lot of things. Who's the toughest guy you ever had to block or tackle or whatever. But then we talk about family. And he said something, he said something, he had 6 children, but then he only said he had 5. And that's when I looked up. His son, Colby, developed pediatric brain cancer at 13 and died at 15. And it was just like, oh, well, the room sure changed when that happened. And I wanted to give him the best head ever, before that, but now I really wanted to dig in, okay? And so we ended the session, and it was all great. What was so funny is he gave me a look when he left, and I thought, oh man, I don't know what that means, but I'm not sure. You know, you always assume the worst. 3 years later, he told me, he said, yeah, when I gave you that look, he said, I thought you were done. I thought it was great. I didn't know, I thought he hated it. So anyway, he leaves and goes home. The players don't ever see the bust until they unveil it after that. That's by design. Well, now remember, every class has a headliner, like Peyton Manning or whatever. This class didn't have a headliner. They were tremendous football players, but there wasn't any one big superstar. Well, Bryant has Eddie DeBartolo unveil with him, and it was a magic moment. Bryant Young stood up and in front of the whole world made his Hall of Fame induction speech in dedication to Colby, who died of pediatric brain cancer. And if you want to spend if you're having a bad day and you can give 11 minutes and 27 seconds up, go to Google Bryant Young Pro Football Hall of Fame induction speech, full speech, and you better get some tissue. It's pretty powerful. And what happened is in that moment, doing the right thing, he became the headliner. He stole the show. The commentators, if you go to my Instagram page, if you go to him, there's the commentators talking video. He blew everybody away. And he did it for the right reason. It was amazing. And, you know, they have caps and t-shirts and all this stuff. And I thought, dadgum, I hadn't got my Bryant Young. An hour and a half later, it was all gone. You couldn't buy any. Everybody bought it out. So Bryant Young, by doing the right thing and dedicating to his son, he just stole the show. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, there you go. That was why I've been walking in the wilderness for so long. I've been walking, and every time I had something that was sad, I just buried down, bore down, got harder, got tougher, better with the zygomatic arch, better with the nostril, better with the cheek, everything. And God said, you know, okay, one of these days we're going to take Bryant Young and we're going to have him meet you, and you're going to tell his story in clay. And I can't tell you the relief it felt. And so from this point forward, that's what I feel like. I'm going to still be a vet, but I'm still going to try to tell people stories with clay. And that was the foundation where Kathy and I started this Humble Heroes project, is finding people like Dr. Coleman and Jean Kate that need their story told and to be able to tell it. Now I'll show you this last slide, not to brag or pat myself on the back, but to seal this. These guys go through a week of parades and gold jacket ceremonies and autograph sessions, and at the end of the week, they're just toast. Well, I get this text from Bryant 2 days later, and it says, Scott, I hope you and your family are doing well. I want to thank you again for the incredible work done on my bust. Just when I thought it couldn't get better than when I saw it, you absolutely made it come to life. Absolutely spot on. I think everyone that knows me would agree. I wish you could have been there to take a picture with me after the enshrinement ceremony. Yeah, me too. Anyway, amazing job, Scott. Thank you for doing my legacy justice. When people see my bust in the hall, they will see me. To be honest, I don't think I can adequately articulate how satisfied and grateful I am to you and for your work. God bless you. My best, Bryant Young. That's God sent that to me to go, there you go. That's what you're supposed to be doing. So here's the thing. Every single one of you in here has got something you can do, okay? I can't sing. I can't play an instrument. You ask me to write a paragraph and I vapor lock. But I know there's people out there that you know that need something. They need a hand up. They need a leg up. They need a ride to the doctor. They need a note. They need something. So every single one of you have that opportunity to do the same thing I'm doing. And what you need to know is you need to put in the work. Start writing those cards now, or start doing that now. Maybe God doesn't want you doing that, but he wants you doing something else. It's your practice, okay? But here's the big thing. When it's quiet and you're alone, if you feel that tap on your shoulder, you better pay attention, because it may be the big man up there giving you a message that you want to hear. Thank you, and God bless you.